Hello family, welcome to Stories by Tocci. We bring you interesting folk tales. Please subscribe and drop a like for us. This generosity would go a long way for us. Also share to family and friends. And please turn on post notification to stay tuned for more. Thank you as you do so. Now let's get into the story. When people spoke of Rachel and Harry in the heart of Abaddon, it was usually with a wistful smile and soft, approving nods. Their love was the kind that made women sigh in salons and men raise glasses in admiration. Rachel was a woman carved from the cloth of quiet strength, thoughtful, measured, and graceful in the way she carried her life. She taught at Christway Academy, a modest but respected school nestled between Dugby and Macola. Her students adored her, not just because she was kind, but because she made them feel seen, even in their smallest victories. Her evenings were often filled with the chatter of children, the clatter of pots as she cooked, and the occasional hum of high-life music playing softly from an old radio. But above all, it was Harry's voice that she listened for. A smooth, reassuring voice, the kind that calmed a room just by being heard. He was the kind of man mothers prayed for when fasting for their daughters. The type who held doors open, paid attention when others missed details, and had a gentle way of making people feel like they mattered. They met in a quiet restaurant in Acadia 8 years earlier during a youth fellowship reunion. And while Rachel had laughed off her friends' teasing that night, she had gone home feeling like something inside her had quietly shifted. By their second date, she was already picturing what his name would sound like paired with hers. And when he finally proposed under a star-swept sky during a business trip in Abuja, her yes had come so quickly it surprised even her. The town didn't just admire them, they cherished them. Their marriage was often held up in church as a symbol of faith, perseverance, and divine blessing. On Sundays, they sat side by side on the third pew at Glory Gate Chapel, fingers intertwined like vines. They were never loud about their affection, but there was a quiet poetry in the way they looked at each other. During Thanksgiving services, when Rachel danced in her gheli and wrapper with the joyful abandon of a woman who knew she was loved, women watched with a longing that was both sacred and human. Even the pastor's wife once confessed to modeling her own marriage after Rachel's. Harry was a businessman through and through. Built like a quiet storm, he had slowly grown his freight and logistics company from one van and 2 drivers to a full fleet that operated routes across Nigeria. He had contracts in Calabar, Warri, and even Sokoto. He spent many weeks traveling, and yet, he never returned without a gift in hand or a memory worth sharing. Rachel had grown used to the rhythm of their life, the temporary absences followed by sweet reunions. In the early years, she would wait eagerly at the window when he returned from his trips, her heart racing at the sound of his engine in the driveway. She always thought that was the true magic of marriage, not the grand gestures but the quiet consistency. She didn't know then that even shadows grow in familiar light. There was a routine to their lives that made Rachel feel safe, cocooned within the predictable rhythm of shared routines and whispered dreams. Every Saturday morning, Harry made akra while she fried yam. They'd sit in the balcony, sharing food off one plate, gossiping about the neighbors in jest, and planning for the future with childlike excitement. They spoke often of building a home in the hills of Idanra, a quiet retreat for their old age. They had no children yet, for years had passed since they began trying, but even in that, Harry had been patient, supportive. Not once had he pressured her. Not once had he suggested something cruel or cowardly, like taking a second wife. Instead, he often said things like, "What is ours will come, in God's own time." And Rachel, who sometimes wept in secret, clung to those words like a lifeline. She'd seen other marriages in town break under lesser pressures. Husbands who had once vowed love abandoning their wives when the cradle stayed empty. But Harry stayed. He stayed, and he held her close, and he made her believe that she was enough even when her body betrayed her hope. This belief, this trust she had in him, became the very soil in which her love grew. And when doubt occasionally flickered in the edges of her thoughts, when a friend's offhand comment or a passing rumor about other men stirred unease, she buried it deep. Harry was not like the others, she reminded herself. Not her Harry. He was cut from different cloth. So when Lydia, her childhood friend from their days at Federal Government College in Zaria, arrived to spend a few days for rest and recovery, Rachel welcomed her with wide arms and warm food. Lydia had been in and out of minor health complications, nothing serious, but enough to make a short break in Abaddon seem necessary. She brought her sharp wit and even sharper tongue, often tossing barbed jokes about the town's gossip and local happenings while sipping zobo on the veranda. Rachel laughed easily in her company, grateful for the distraction. Harry, who had announced a work trip to Enugu 2 days earlier, left that same evening with a duffel bag and his usual kiss on the forehead. "Back in 3 days," he said. "I'll call you when I land." And like clockwork, the call came hours later, his voice as smooth as silk, assuring her he'd arrived and settled into his hotel. Rachel put the phone down, sighed, and smiled to herself. But Lydia's eyes had lingered a little longer on the call screen, her brows furrowing briefly before she looked away. There was something about men, she often said, when they're too perfect, check again. The devil too once wore wings before he fell. Rachel had waved off the comment with a chuckle. My own devil wears suit and tie, and still takes me to church every Sunday. But Lydia said nothing more. She only sipped her drink and watched the sun slowly disappear behind the clouds. Lydia didn't know why she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. It wasn't anything Rachel had said. Rachel was still her same old self, warm and thoughtful, always attentive to her needs. And Harry, even from a distance, had kept up his usual consistency. He texted Rachel every morning and called every night. He sent a photo of his supposed hotel breakfast in Enugu, another of him in a business meeting, all time-stamped and neat like a man with nothing to hide. But something about it all seemed overly curated, too polished. Men like Harry didn't usually remember to document that much, especially when the wife wasn't the suspicious type. Lydia knew how men operated, or at least she believed she did. She had seen too many stories unfold behind closed doors, women clinging to shadows, holding on to the echo of promises. And while Rachel was the last person she would ever want to hurt, Lydia's instincts had never failed her. They buzzed louder the more Harry's absence stretched into careful perfection. She tried to dismiss it, telling herself she was simply being cynical, but when a woman has seen enough betrayal, even silence starts to sound like a warning. On the third day, when Rachel suggested she get her medications refilled at the pharmacy by the roundabout in Bodija, Lydia agreed, but something compelled her to walk instead of driving. She needed air, she told herself. Needed to think. She took the long way, passing familiar roads she hadn't walked in years, rusted signposts, cracked pavements, barbershops still playing the same Fuji mixtapes she remembered from her youth. It was the kind of path that pulled memories out from hiding, and Lydia let them come, knowing that nostalgia was both comfort and curse. But just as she turned the corner toward the pharmacy, a black Range Rover slowed to a stop by the entrance of the Destiny Royale Hotel. Her steps faltered, a strange tremor crawling down her spine. She had seen that car too many times. The custom plate, the subtle scratch near the taillight, it was Harry's. Her mouth turned dry. She stood half-hidden behind a kiosk selling recharge cards and corn. Her heart pounded, not in fear, but in something deeper, more dreadful. The hotel gate creaked as it swung open. Out stepped Harry, not in the dusty blazer he'd worn on his trip, but in a casual linen shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow. He was laughing. Walking alongside him, clinging to his arm like it was her birthright, was a girl who couldn't have been older than 24. Light-skinned, long braids, and that careless youthful laughter that carried no burden of consequence. Lydia's breath caught. The girl leaned in to kiss Harry's cheek, playful, familiar, intimate. There was no distance in their closeness, no innocence in their posture. It wasn't a business meeting, it wasn't a cousin, and it most certainly wasn't a misunderstanding. It was betrayal painted in broad daylight. Lydia stood rooted, watching the scene like a woman outside her own dream. The hotel gate hadn't fully shut before she stepped backward into the shadows, still clutching her bag against her chest, as if it could protect her from what she'd just seen. Her stomach twisted, not with shock, but with rage and grief on Rachel's behalf. Her mind replayed Rachel's face that morning, smiling as she'd spread peanut butter on toast, humming one gospel song or the other, completely unaware that the man she trusted with her soul was only minutes away, playing lover boy with a child who still probably called her mother for data. Lydia turned and walked briskly away from the hotel, barely aware of her surroundings. She didn't even buy the medication she came for. Back in the guest room, she paced for almost an hour, unsure of how to deliver such a brutal truth. What words could carry that kind of weight? Which sentence wouldn't feel like a slap? It took her another hour before she finally typed the message, short, sharp, surgical. Your husband is in town. That was all. No drama. No accusation. Just the kind of sentence that forces silence to lean in and listen. She dropped the phone and exhaled, not realizing how tightly she'd been holding her breath. When Rachel replied a few minutes later with a simple, "Are you sure?" Lydia's heart broke a little. Not because of the question, but because Rachel still needed to ask. Later that night, the air in the house felt different. Quieter. Rachel moved around like a woman balancing on invisible glass. She hadn't said much after Lydia confirmed what she saw, only sat on the edge of the bed staring at nothing, blinking slowly as if each thought she formed had to fight through waves of disbelief. But it was disbelief seasoned with something else, resolve. She didn't wail or lash out or crumble the way Lydia had feared. She folded her nightwear with the same care she always did. She cleaned the dishes, even refilled the soap dispenser like it mattered. When she finally spoke, her voice was so calm it gave Lydia chills. "I need to be sure with my own eyes," Rachel said. "I want to see what kind of lies he can tell when he thinks he's not being watched." And just like that, a plan began to unfold. She told Harry the next morning that she'd be traveling to a cure for a few days to see her mother. She lied effortlessly. The kind of lie women tell when truth no longer serves them. Harry didn't hesitate. He even offered to book her ticket, sent her transport fare, and told her to rest well. Lydia watched the exchange with a clenched jaw. That man was either too confident in his schemes or too foolish to realize the storm he'd just invited. Rachel left the house that evening, not to a cure, but to a serviced apartment 5 minutes from Destiny Royale. They were now both waiting for the same man in the same town, under 2 different pretenses. And the game had only just begun. Rachel stared at the ceiling of the rented serviced apartment, the hum of the air conditioner barely covering the weighty silence of the room. Her mind wasn't still. No, it hadn't rested since Lydia's message. Thoughts darted in and out of her head like restless birds, old memories, scattered moments, pieces of laughter and comfort that now seemed out of place. She closed her eyes and tried to replay the last few months in her head, seeking signs, inconsistencies, gaps in Harry's stories. But there had been none. He had masked it all with a kind of grace that would make even the most seasoned liar take notes. And that was what chilled her the most. The ease with which he lived inside his deception. The comfort with which he touched her face, told her he loved her, and asked about her day. Rachel had always believed she was a good judge of people, particularly of the man she'd chosen to build a life with. But here she was now, crouched on a stranger's mattress in a stranger's building, hiding in the same city where her husband was supposed to be away working. The taste of the lie she had told him, about traveling to a cure, still sat bitter on her tongue. It was the first time she'd ever been dishonest with him, and yet the irony wasn't lost on her. Sometimes, you have to wear a mask to unmask someone else. She hadn't packed much, just a small overnight bag with 2 outfits, a headscarf, her tablet, and a brown notebook she hadn't written in for years. There were no cameras, no dramatic recording devices, no friends waiting in cars. This wasn't a movie. She wasn't here to make a scene. She was here to see the truth with her own 2 eyes, unfiltered, unedited. If Harry was indeed the man Lydia had seen at the hotel, she needed to catch him in his natural element, unguarded, unaware. That was the only way to strip away doubt. Rachel knew herself too well. If she confronted him without proof, he would talk circles around her. He had the kind of voice that could talk you into forgetting you ever had suspicions in the first place. His tongue was sweet, sharpened by years of corporate negotiations, and the charisma of a man used to being trusted. No, she had to outthink him. And so she waited like a hunter at the edge of a clearing, patient and still. She sent him messages in between, asked about how work was going, even reminded him to eat. She played her part so well that it scared her. Perhaps that's what betrayal does to a woman. It teaches her the language of pretenders. The lies came easily now, not because she wanted to lie, but because she needed to learn the rhythm of the person who had been lying to her first. And as each hour passed, the fire inside her cooled into something sharper. Not rage. Not sadness. Strategy. Lydia came by quietly every evening with updates. Times Harry had entered the hotel, what clothes he wore, how long he stayed. On the second evening, she confirmed that the same girl from earlier had returned with him. She wore a tight mustard-colored gown this time, heels that clicked against the tiled floor, and walked with the confidence of someone who believed she was untouchable. Rachel listened to Lydia's description with a blank expression, writing down nothing, but cataloging every detail in her mind. Her heart still hurt, yes, but she refused to let pain be louder than clarity. She began to imagine what Harry must have told the girl. Was she aware of his marriage? Had he spun a story of separation? Did he paint Rachel as some cold wife who didn't understand him? Or worse, had he said nothing at all, letting the illusion of his availability fill in the blanks? Rachel wasn't sure which scenario stung more. The betrayal of secrecy, or the betrayal of indifference. There was something insidious about being erased without your knowledge. But Rachel wasn't going to allow herself to become invisible. That night, while the city's lights blinked lazily beyond her window, she sat up on the bed and prayed, not for Harry's change, but for her own strength. She asked God not to fix what was broken, but to give her the wisdom to know whether to leave it shattered. She didn't need divine intervention to force love where it no longer existed. She only needed clarity, and maybe a little vengeance in her own quiet way. By the third night, Rachel had made her decision. She rose early that morning, ironed a simple dress, one of Harry's favorites, a pale blue cotton gown with soft embroidery around the collar, and packed a small handbag. She looked in the mirror for a long time. Her eyes were not the eyes of a woman coming to beg. There was no sadness left in her reflection, only finality. The time for wondering was over. She knew from Lydia's message that Harry had checked in at 9:35 p.m. the previous evening and had not left the hotel through the night. That meant he was still there. And if patterns meant anything, he would check out just before noon. She knew room 407 now. It had taken some digging, but Lydia had a way of getting information from staff without raising eyebrows. Rachel left the apartment without a word, entered a Kiki at the junction, and took the 10-minute ride to Destiny Royale. Her heart didn't pound. Her hands didn't shake. The hotel lobby smelled of lemon polish and fresh flowers, the same way it did on their anniversary 3 years ago when they'd come there for dinner. She walked through the corridor like a woman who belonged. When she reached the 4th floor, her footsteps slowed. Every door seemed to breathe as she passed, each one guarding its own secret. And then she stood in front of 407. There was no turning back. No second-guessing. She raised her hand and knocked 3 times. Soft. Intentional. No anger. Just presence. There was silence from inside. Then movement. Then the unmistakable sound of whispered panic. Rachel didn't flinch. Her voice, when it came, was calm as ever. "Harry, it's me." Open the door. For a brief moment, everything inside the room turned still. Still in that unnatural, eerie way that happens when truth knocks and deceit runs out of places to hide. The rustle of sheets, the soft thump of feet hitting the carpet, the panicked shuffle of fabric being gathered, Rachel heard it all. Through that closed door, she could hear the whispering scramble of 2 people caught in the middle of a truth they never expected to meet face to face. Rachel stood motionless, her fingers relaxed by her sides, her breath even. She had not come to scream or tear clothes. This was not going to be a market scene. She was not the kind of woman to let chaos tell her story. From the moment she stepped into the hotel, she had carried herself with a stillness that came from clarity. Inside the room, Harry's voice came through in muffled panic. "Just stay there. Don't say anything," he whispered. His footsteps neared the door. Rachel didn't blink. When the lock turned, and the door creaked open just slightly, Harry's face appeared, partially hidden behind the edge of the doorframe. His expression was a mix of fear, confusion, and disbelief. "Rachel," he said, voice low, almost pleading. What are you doing here?" She tilted her head gently, like someone observing a stray thought. "I thought you were in Enugu," she said softly, her eyes unflinching. "Unless Enugu now has a Destiny Royale hotel." Harry opened the door wider, as if trying to block her view of the room with his own body. But it was too late. Rachel's eyes had already scanned the space behind him. The unmade bed, the half-empty wine bottle, the second pair of heels on the floor near the edge of the mattress, and then, briefly, the figure of a young woman wrapped in the duvet, her face flushed with shame and panic. Rachel looked back at Harry, her expression unreadable. "You always told me honesty is what separates men from boys," she said. "So be a man now. Speak." Harry stepped out of the way, but Rachel did not enter. She had no interest in walking into that room. That room, to her, was a grave. A grave for all the years she had loved a man who had carefully, quietly dug holes behind her back. "Rachel, it's not what you think," he began, the same line she'd heard in movies, the same tired phrase men reached for when their house of lies started to burn. "We didn't plan it. It just happened." She raised an eyebrow. "She just happened to land in your hotel bed? You just happened to stop being in Enugu and start being in Ibadan?" Her voice wasn't raised, but the weight in it was undeniable. It pressed down on him harder than any slap could have. The girl behind him started to gather her things quickly, wordlessly. Rachel glanced at her just once, then turned her attention back to Harry. "I'm not here to fight for what isn't mine," she said. "I came so I can stop doubting myself." Harry stepped out into the corridor fully now, gently closing the door behind him. His voice dropped even further. Rachel, listen. I didn't plan for this. I swear. It was just one mistake. She let out a small, almost pitying laugh. It wasn't one mistake, Harry. A mistake is a slip, an accident, a thing that happens once and stings with shame. This is a pattern. I saw the receipts. I've been watching you come to this hotel for days. I've seen the girl twice. You didn't trip and fall into this. You scheduled it. He looked away, rubbing his forehead like he could press the guilt out through his skin. I was going to stop, he mumbled. I didn't mean for it to get this far. Rachel studied him then, really studied him. The man before her didn't look like the Harry she married. He looked smaller, weighed down by his own cowardice. You weren't going to stop, she said quietly. You were just hoping I'd never find out. And that was the root of it all. Not even the betrayal itself, but the arrogance of his certainty that she would remain in the dark forever. He had trusted her loyalty more than she'd trusted his. And now, with that illusion broken, he looked lost. Please come home, he said suddenly. Let's talk. Let me explain properly. I'll fix it. I swear I will. But Rachel only shook her head. The time for explanations was before the lies. Before the secrecy. Before the girl. Her voice remained steady, but in her chest, her heart was slowly breaking itself into pieces too sharp to ignore. Down the hallway, a cleaning lady pushed a cart lazily past them, giving a brief, curious glance before moving along. Rachel stepped aside to let her pass, her body still angled toward Harry, but her mind already moving miles away. She didn't know what came next, not fully, but she knew what wouldn't follow her home. Harry wouldn't. The marriage, at least the one she thought she had, wouldn't. And the version of herself that once believed blind trust was noble, that version had died the moment she knocked on room 407. I'm not going to shout, she said finally, her tone almost too calm. I won't disgrace you or myself. But I won't forget this. And I won't forgive it. Not because I'm cruel, but because forgiveness isn't medicine for the person who broke you. It's medicine for the person trying to heal. And I'm not ready to heal with you in the room. Harry swallowed hard, his hands dropping to his sides, helpless. He had always been composed, always in control, but now he looked like a man learning that some mistakes aren't reversible. Please don't leave like this, he said one last time. Rachel smiled sadly, a ghost of the woman who once waited at the window for his return. I'm not leaving, Harry. You already did. With that, she turned and walked away. Her steps were slow, deliberate. There was no rush in her exit. She didn't need to run. She had already won by seeing the truth, and by refusing to beg for anything less than the respect she had always deserved. Rachel did not remember the walk down the hotel hallway in a traditional sense. It existed more like a blur, a dreamlike trance where each step felt both light and weighted at the same time. Her sandals made the softest sound against the tiles, and the scent of the hallway air freshener, something like artificial citrus, drifted around her like a false comfort. Her mind was eerily still, like a pond after rain. She passed 2 hotel staff, both glancing at her subtly, the way people do when they sense a story is walking past but are too polite to ask questions. She kept her gaze forward. Her dignity was intact, and that mattered more than any temporary emotion clawing at her throat. At the entrance she paused. The revolving door turned slowly, as if the world itself was allowing her a moment to collect herself. When she stepped into the open air, the afternoon sun greeted her with a blinding brightness, but she didn't flinch. Her skin, warmed by betrayal and resolve, absorbed the heat without resistance. A gentle wind lifted the corner of her wrapper, and for the first time in hours, she felt something close to peace, if only for a breath. Rachel hailed a cab without hesitation. The driver, a middle-aged man with tired eyes and the smell of pepper soup lingering in the back seat, asked no questions when she gave the address of the apartment she had rented. The ride was quiet. No radio. No chatter. Just the hum of the road and the weight of the day. Back at the apartment, the walls welcomed her like an old friend who knew better than to ask questions. Lydia was already waiting, sitting on the edge of the sofa with her phone in hand, scrolling without focus. The moment Rachel walked in, their eyes met, and Lydia stood quickly, unsure whether to offer a hug or space. Rachel gave a small nod, neither inviting nor dismissing. Lydia understood. Some wounds prefer silence. Rachel moved to the dining table, pulled out the chair, and sat without removing her shoes. She placed her phone face down on the table and stared at it, as if expecting it to breathe or speak first. Lydia remained a few steps away, arms crossed loosely, unsure what had unfolded, but sensing the finality in her friend's posture. Rachel finally spoke, her voice low but clear. I saw everything. Lydia said nothing, just nodded once, a nod full of rage and sadness she didn't dare voice. Rachel leaned back and stared at the ceiling for a long time. He tried to speak. Said it was a mistake. She chuckled dryly. How do you make the same mistake 3 nights in a row with the same woman in the same room? Lydia walked over slowly and sat across from her. You don't, she said gently. That's not a mistake. That's an arrangement. The word landed heavily in the room. Arrangement. As if the betrayal had its own business model. Rachel pressed her fingers together, trying to still their faint tremor. He asked me to come home. Said we should talk. Lydia tilted her head. And what did you say? Rachel looked her square in the eye. I told him I'm not leaving. I told him he already did. That night, Rachel lay in bed and stared at the wall for hours. Her body was still, but her mind raced quietly like a river underneath frozen ice. She had rehearsed this moment in theory for years. What she would do if she ever discovered Harry was unfaithful. But no rehearsal could prepare her for the theater of reality. The face she kissed each morning had now become a stranger's. The voice that once lulled her to sleep now echoed like a lie in her ears. She turned over, restless, fingers tightening around the bedsheet. Her instincts told her to pack up and return to her own house. Not for Harry, but for herself. That house had been her home too, a space she had labored over, scrubbed, decorated, and infused with love. Why should she give it up so easily? Why should the guilty man get to stay comfortable in a bed he had already soiled with another? The thought disturbed her more than she expected. The next morning, without telling Lydia, Rachel returned to her house in Abaddon. She arrived early, too early for neighbors to ask questions. She let herself in with her key. The living room was untouched. The scent of Harry's cologne still hung faintly in the curtains. She walked through the rooms like a woman inspecting her memories. Everything was in place, but she wasn't, and that contrast pressed against her ribs like a second heart. When she reached the bedroom, she found the corner of the bed still dented from Harry's last sleep. She didn't cry, not even once. She opened the wardrobe and began packing. She wasn't sure how long she'd stay away or what decisions she'd make tomorrow, but today, she would leave with what belonged to her. She took only her clothes, her journals, and a few framed photos of her family. She left the wedding album on the shelf, purposefully, not out of forgetfulness. Let it sit there like a relic of a love that once breathed but no longer had a pulse. As she zipped the last bag, her eyes landed on a single envelope peeking out from the drawer beside the bed. Curious, she opened it. Inside was a handwritten note, clearly not addressed to her. Her hands tightened around the paper as she read. It was affectionate, clumsily written, filled with teenage-sounding phrases and half-formed promises. I like the way you laugh. You make me feel young again. I wish I met you first. No name. No date. But it was unmistakably Harry's handwriting. And the ache that returned wasn't sharp. It was dull and deep, like something too familiar to hurt properly. Rachel folded the note, placed it back in the envelope, and tucked it under Harry's pillow. Let him see it when he next lies down. Let him wonder whether she cried. She didn't. She had no tears left. On her way out, she paused in the doorway, taking one final look at the home she had once built with her whole heart. Then she pulled the door shut behind her, not softly, not harshly, just finally. Rachel hadn't planned what life would look like after everything fell apart. In truth, the idea of life after anything wasn't something she spent much time contemplating. She had always been the sort of woman who anchored herself in the present, attending to what was in front of her with patience and purpose. But now, as days passed and silence filled the spaces once warmed by routine, she began to understand that endings rarely announce themselves with clarity. They simply unfold, slowly at first, then all at once. In the first week after she left the house, she lived like someone who had been unplugged from her own body. She woke when she could, moved when she needed to, and let time pass without asking it to hurry. The apartment she now occupied, still modest, still unfamiliar, smelled of new paint and factory-cleaned curtains. Nothing about it reminded her of Harry, and maybe that was why she chose it. She avoided the corners of Abaddon where couples strolled hand in hand, or where old memories threatened to bubble up uninvited. Even her phone became quieter. She had muted his contact, not blocked him. She wanted to know if he would try, but not because she was waiting. Rather, she wanted to see whether guilt had taught him consistency, or if his silence was yet another kind of confession. A few messages trickled in, mostly short. Please, can we talk? I miss you. Let's fix this. Rachel read each one with the same dispassionate calm she used to mark her students' failed scripts, firm, detached, and without emotion. What she didn't expect, however, was how the absence of noise became its own form of healing. Slowly, without announcement, she began to feel like herself again. It wasn't dramatic or sudden, just subtle moments she began to notice. The way her laugh returned during a random afternoon with Lydia, over umla and cold malt, after a story about a neighbor's goat that had eaten someone's pounded yam. The way she started humming again while boiling rice. The way she caught herself looking in the mirror without searching for signs of failure. One evening, as rain danced gently on her window pane, she reached for the brown notebook she had carried with her from the old house. It had been untouched for years, once filled with wedding planning details, meal recipes, and hopeful prayers. She flipped through it slowly, pausing at a page where she had written, "Marriage is not a reward, it is a responsibility." She chuckled bitterly at that line, not because she disagreed with it, but because it reminded her how much she had been willing to give in the name of responsibility. How much bending, waiting, forgiving, and sacrificing she had done, hoping that her commitment would inspire his. But now she understood something else. Love cannot thrive where loyalty is absent. You cannot build a future with someone who treats commitment like an option. The more she wrote that night, the more her hands steadied. Each word she put down was a release, a letting go of old expectations, of dreams she had outgrown, of a man she no longer recognized. She didn't write for closure. She wrote to reclaim herself. By the third week, she began making her own routines again. She taught part-time at a local community center, helping young girls with their schoolwork and preparing final-year students for WAC exams. It was work that reminded her who she was before Harry. Before she became someone's wife, before her identity was tangled with someone else's presence. The girls she mentored often looked at her with admiration, unaware of the bruises beneath her smile. But Rachel didn't mind. Their curiosity made her feel visible again, their laughter reigniting the embers of joy that had dimmed inside her. One of the girls, a bright, sharp-mouthed 15-year-old named Adora, once asked her why she wore her wedding ring if her husband wasn't around. Rachel looked at the ring, blinked, and realized she had forgotten it was even there. That night, she removed it and placed it gently in a small wooden bowl on her nightstand. No ceremony, no speech, just the quiet understanding that it no longer served a purpose. Not long after, she got a letter, not an email or a message, but a handwritten letter delivered by a dispatch rider. It was from Harry, for pages of apology, explanations, and promises. He wrote about regret, about waking up every morning hoping she'd return, about how he'd started counseling, how he'd stopped seeing the other woman. Rachel read the letter once, twice, then a third time. And then she folded it neatly, placed it back in its envelope, and slid it into the back of a drawer. She didn't respond. Some wounds are not healed by words. Some trust, once broken, becomes a language two people can no longer speak fluently. It wasn't that Rachel no longer believed in love. It wasn't even that she had turned bitter or cold. She still admired the idea of companionship, of partnership built on mutual respect and shared values. But she had learned the hard way, that love without truth is a castle built on sand. It may look strong in the sunlight, but it cannot survive the storm. And storms will always come. She hadn't closed her heart. She had simply changed the locks and given the key to someone who would knock instead of sneaking in. Her final weeks in that apartment were not filled with sorrow, but with plans. Small ones. She bought new bedsheets in colors she liked, enrolled in an online course for adult education development, started growing a few potted plants near the window. Things she had once set aside in service of someone else's dreams now became part of hers. One morning, as she sipped tea and looked out at the slow-moving traffic along the street, she smiled, not because life was perfect, but because she no longer needed it to be. She had come through the fire and hadn't just survived. She had come out wiser, softer in the right places, stronger where it mattered. When Lydia asked her if she missed him, she paused only briefly before answering. "I don't miss him," she said. "I miss who I thought he was, but not the man who showed up in room 407. And just like that, the story closed, not with vengeance, not with chaos, but with a woman choosing herself and never again apologizing for it. If someone ever makes you question your worth, your instincts, or your place in their life, remember this: silence can be louder than shouting, and walking away can be braver than staying. Trust is not something that should be begged for, and loyalty should never feel like a burden. Don't shrink yourself to fit into someone else's lies. Heal, grow, and choose yourself without guilt. May your heart never be tied to anyone who does not value it. May your peace never be exchanged for empty promises. May your eyes see truth before it breaks you. May your spirit reject every love that comes in disguise. May your home be filled with honesty, joy, and mutual respect. And when betrayal knocks, may strength answer the door for you. May you walk away from what wounds you and walk boldly into what restores you. May God wrap you in wisdom, lift you with courage, and crown you with healing that leaves no scars behind. You will not settle for less. You will not cry over who was never sent to stay. Your story will be proof that grace still holds those who choose themselves. In peace, in clarity, and in full confidence, may your next chapter be better than your last. Amen. Hope you enjoyed this interesting story. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Turn on post notifications. See you on our next story.